welcome to another episode of Dynamo and Fun Parts with Dynamo. So for today's episode, we're going to be looking at something very important. And once again, this concept kind of came out of necessity just because Autodesk is very famous for providing very old tools and very little innovating aspect related to them. So on that end, we're always kind of forced to find innovative ways to work around certain issues. So today we're going to be looking at how to enhance our BIM coordination process. And specifically, we want to enhance a little bit of that clash detection report. In the past, I've created a lot of clash detection reports, and the report kind of looks like something like this, which is not something that's very practical unless you're going to go for more softwares out there. And I do understand we could look at specifically BIM track or Vitso, for example, but down the line, not every company is going to be able to afford. Additionally, when I'm distributing these clash detection report to the stakeholders, some of them are non-technical, not very technical in terms of BIMs and visualizing just these clash detection reports. So they're going to be looking at this. They're going to be wondering how to locate these element ID components. And often these images are not very famous for them. We can provide them with the clash detection report. For example, if I go into my clash detection, my Navisworks file, you're going to see that once again, they require that technical expertise in order to navigate this. They need to go into the clash detective aspect. They need to look at the results. Potentially, if you're lucky enough, they're going to have somebody with some expertise. But even then, they have to navigate multiple softwares and multiple, environments out there that they're not entirely too familiar. So once again, we have this issue. Let's say mechanical engineers. Well, a lot of them are going to be engineers by nature. They're not going to be BIM designers. So they have to work with BIM technicians, to relay them that information, to kind of provide that feedback. Well, once again, a lot of components within that process, not something useful. So what we want to do is we want to create something like this that's going to be very practical for them. In this sense, they can visualize the information, they can navigate around it, they can see, for example, the structural components in red that are clashing, and they can see the HVAC components in green that are clashing as well. Everything else is kind of grayed out, zoned out. And often this tool is available for everybody to use. For example, if I share this document, I can just copy this link. It's going to be valid for 30 days. I can extend this past 30 days. However, they will be able to open this in any browser. They won't require any licenses. So there's an added benefit to this story. Once again, if I'm looking at my clash detection report, I can kind of see that I do get the grid lines, I do get these locations, but this is not very telling us as to where my clashes are. And once again, if we don't want to go into the whole BIM clash management, if we don't want to go into these additional softwares, additional licenses, we can use a tool like this that's going to be pretty straightforward. You can kind of visualize overall where your clashes are. For example, I know this is on my ground level. I know this is in my corner here. I can see all my clashes related to them. It doesn't require a lot of expertise to navigate this tool, but as we can see, there's going to be a lot of benefits. So once again, we're going to go through the process of recreating this, and hopefully this is going to provide you with an innovative way and a workaround to achieving an optimal result within your clash detection report. Once again, this is to enhance that process. So let's open this file. It's a project that I worked in the past, so I'm going to try to hide most of the details there. But for most part, we can kind of see we have all this information. It's not ideal. We're working with what we got. So in this stage, I just want to kind of navigate the project a little bit so we can kind of see we have a lot of mechanical components. I have my structural components. For most part, I have a lot of components. So for today, what we're going to do is we're going to create a clash, and we're going to use a new test to create the clash detection report. I'm assuming you're going to know most of these things on your part, or whatever you're working. I'm going to call this HVAC versus structural. It's just one of those examples. I'm going to define within my file, I'm going to use my HVAC components, I'm also going to use all my structural components. So here I'm just defining my selections. I could have went into properties or compact or these search sets. I'm not going to use those. I'm going to leave my tolerance at 0.005. I could do less or more. We're going to just run this as is, and we're going to get something like this. So at this stage, we get a lot of that information here, which is great. This is what we need. And we can kind of see this is great to visualize. However, if I leave this, it goes back to basics. So once again, I really need to be inside my Clash Detective in order to kind of get to this overall view. But once again, a lot of wireframe aspect. And we can see while this is practical, you still need to navigate this whole entirety of the user interface. You'll still need somewhat of an expertise in order to get to this information. I find that it's a lot more visual here. It's a lot easier to navigate, and there's a more ease to navigate this type of information. So once again, we'll get to the basics of how we can achieve some of these things. So once again, I can kind of see I have 382 clashes. It's going to be very hard to kind of go individually into each clash. I can select one and then I'll be able to navigate, get a little bit of a sense. I can create a report, great. However, it doesn't solve my issue when I have, in this document, it's great. I only have 70 clashes. However, here I have 382. So navigating 382 clashes in here, it's very problematic. Not only that, this is one we can kind of see in this example. I keep selecting things. However, we can see in this example, we have one element clashing with multiple clashes. So once again, I would really have to go into the details and grouping these and doing all this miscellaneous work that's going to just take that effort away from the valuable things. All to be said, I'm just hoping that I'm getting the proper sound recording. So I'll just say I don't want to go through the entirety of all these things. However, we do have some interesting options here. I can highlight all my clashes. I can highlight the singular one. I like highlighting all my clashes. This allows me to see certain things a little bit better. I can dim the others or I can hide the others, which is very practical. However, when I hide the others, we can kind of see I have only individual clashes. So what I want to do in order to bypass this is I'm going to select my first, I'm going to hold shift, and I'm going to select my last one. And now we can kind of see, even if I do this, it still maintains the same thing. However, if I group these components now into one group, and I kind of forgot, I didn't add them to the group. I should have right clicked, but I can bypass this again. I can just drag and drop into the group. So if I group these and now I hide all the others, now we can kind of see I'm able to visualize only the clashes, which is great. The reason why, it's because now by hiding all the rest of the components, I can actually come and I can select these clashes individually. So now what I've done here is I've actually selected all my clashes, which is exactly what I'm looking at. So once again, we can kind of see all these things being access in this way, which is exactly what we're looking for. So once again, we have a lot of things that we need to work on. So in this case, I do want to create that overall aspect. In order for us to create all this, we're going to need to fine tune our Navisworks a little bit. The fun part is they're all green and they're all red in this case. However, when I go away from this, you can kind of see everything goes back to the basics. However, when I select certain elements, let's say for example this floor, I can go into my item tool and I can change the color potentially of this, which provides us with a very effective way of flagging these. So this kind of tells us what we want to do later on. Let me just go back to gray, which is okay. So what I want to do instead is I'm going to go back into my Clash Detective process. I'm going to select all these components now. So once again, I'm going to select these components, and you can kind of see I'm selecting all these components. I have my structural components. I have you can kind of see the blues are highlighted. So if I deselect, I should be able to deselect only these components. So once again, you can kind of see I've only selected the ones that I have here. I just want to double check to make sure that I have them properly selected. So once again, we can kind of see all of these. Let me just make sure. Sometimes I just, nope, it's not going to work with control. So I'm hoping that I'm able to deselect some of these things. Is it selecting all of them? That's my question. Probably it's going to select all of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do two groups here. So I'm going to do search sets. I'm going to manage my sets and I'm going to create a search set. The selection set that's going to be called all clashes. So these are all my clashes. So if I select this within my wireframe, even if I come outside the clash detective, I can select these and I can hide unselected, and you can kind of see I'm able to filter my results based on my clashes, which is exactly what we need. So now I'm going to just try to play around with it. I want to see how I'm able to access to some of this a little bit more effectively. I'm hoping to be able to deselect part of these components. So now that I have only those other components selected. So once again, we can kind of see certain components are being added. So some of them are selected, some of them are deselected. So now I'm able to go further down and I'm going to just fine tune these as clashes HVAC. So I'm just creating some notes. Actually, it's the other way around. I've made a mistake. This is my structure. I've deselected my structural. I'll call it str just for the sake of argument. So now we can kind of see that if I unhide everything and I just select my clashes, we can kind of see I've made that mistake. It's not going to work out because this is going to select everything. So I'm just going to delete it once again. Like I said, it's a work in progress. So bear with me a little bit. We're going to get to what we need to do. I'm going to unhide everything. I'm going to select all my clashes. I'm going to hide unselected. So we're back to basics. So I think we're going to have to do this manually. I'm hoping that there was a way to do this a little bit more faster, but seems like there's not. And I thought at one point there was a way. I'm just going to have to rethink how I've done it in the past. However, if I hold down shift, I can actually, nope, I can't go like this. Control. So by clicking control, I'm able to deselect them, and I'm hoping that I'm able to do this with a major category. So if I go here and I control, nope, it's only able to do it. Not able to deselect that. I have to really go individually and unselect them, which is okay. It's a little bit of work, but down the line, there's going to be a lot of benefits. There was a way to do this a little bit more faster, and I'm going to get to the basics of how. Potentially, I could just filter these results. And by filtering these results, for example, I could search the scenes for item based on specific parameters. Not too sure I'm going to be able to do this. There is a way. I know there is a way. If there's a way, there's a way. But for now, we're going to do it manually just to kind of demonstrate what we're trying to do. Not ideal, especially if you're going to have a large project. You're going to have to automate this process as well. I'm having a blank mind on how to do it automatically. But we'll do it manually, whatever. Not something that's going to... And I just messed up. There has to be a better way. Potentially I'm gonna let us figure it out. There's got to be a way. So in this sense, we have this components. Potentially what I'll do is I'm just gonna, as soon as I select here, why is it unselecting it? So I'm gonna unselect my flex docs. I think it's gonna be a lot easier than going back and forth. So once again, just holding control, I'm able to unselect these. And not what I want to be doing, but here's what it is. And if Autodesk was up to point, they would provide us with proper tools so we can achieve this down the line. We're not that fortunate, therefore we have to do this a little bit more on the manual side. Once again, just unselecting everything. I did choose a very large file, unfortunately, but you're going to see it's going to take maybe 5 minutes at max to do this. And I might just unclick this. Essentially, all I'm doing is I'm unselecting all these components. As you can see, they're mostly all unselected. So we have a few of them to go through. And I'm going to have to do this twice because I'm going to be saving these search sets. There is a good reason why I'm doing this. In this case, there was a preliminary step I should have done, and potentially I am going to redo this. Third time's a luck. So if I go into my item tools, I'm going to change the appearance of all my components here. And let's say I'm going to put this into red. So the way that we've had it before is our structural components are red. So therefore I'm going to put it to red, and we can kind of see our components are now red. If I unhide everything and I re-hide unselected, we can see we've bypassed this color. It's going to look a little bit different. So once again, there is a thought process. I just have to go through it. So in this case, I'm going to use the ones that are unselected. So once again, I think I have a lot less structural components than I have mechanical components. So I'm going to unselect my mechanical components. It's going to go a little bit faster. And then I'm going to override the color of that remaining portion of my selection to be a little bit of a different color. So that way we're going to be able to achieve exactly that desired effect. So once again, we're not done entirely in this process, but we're going to be able to see that we're going to get to where we want to get. And it's one of those tricks that not a lot of people know. I haven't met almost anybody that knew this. So good for us. We're going to get a little bit more of that insight of what we can do. Once again, very unfortunate that we have to use these workarounds, but it is what it is. I mean, down the line, we have to work with the tools that we have. And I'm not a big fan of just buying licenses. The more licenses you have, the more software you're involving. You're just adding layer on top of layer. It's not a very good way to go forward unless you have the funds. Often, the small key players won't necessarily have the funds to just keep buying these licenses. And let's not forget, every year we see an increase of pricing. We see more and more subscription-based licenses. So it's very unfortunate within the industry that we have this situation where everything's so damn expensive in terms of licenses. So we'll try to keep this to the basics. The tools that we have, most people are going to have Revit. By having Revit, they're going to have AutoCAD as well. They're going to have Navisworks involved within that bundle. So most times I just want to emphasize on the tools that we have already at our disposal, just because we are paying for these licenses, and let's be effective. Let's be effective the way that we can. We'll get to where we need to later on. So I think we're almost done. We have a few more. Just looking at it from here, I can see I've deselected most of them. So I feel very confident that we're almost at the end. So that being said, we can kind of see that I've created the rest of these clashes. I've unselected the rest of the clashes, so the last selection left is all my mechanical components, which is great. I just want to make sure that I haven't missed anything. I know one of them was weirdly still selected, which is this one. I don't want to highlight it, but I just want to make sure that it's not selected anywhere, and hopefully I'm not gonna unselect everything by accidentally clicking. But it feels like we don't have that beam selected anywhere, which is good, and potentially this is that beam. So I could go and unselect it here. I can unselect it. Let me go back so it feels like it's still selected. I'm gonna hope that this is not. There we go. All right, everything has been unselected. It doesn't feel like we still have a blue icon. Why do we have a blue icon? Should be fine. For most part, it should be fine. We have everything. So sometimes, just for the sake of argument, I will save this selection. This is my HVAC, so I'm going to call it clashes HVAC. And once again, I can go into my item 2 and I'm going to bypass this color and I'm going to create a nice, I like to use dark green just because it's a little bit apparent. So now we can kind of see that overall we have all of these. So if I unhide everything and I select all my clashes and I unhide my selection, we can kind of see that it's almost there where we need it to be. So now what I want to do is I want to select all my clashes and I want to hide these specifically. I don't want to hide the unselected one. I want to hide these. The reason why is because I want to be able to select everything else around it. So now that everything is hidden, we can see my components are hidden within my view. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all my components around it. I'm going to do the same process and I'm going to select a nice little gray color. But the only difference is I'm going to add a 95% transparency. So now we can see 95 is a little bit too extreme, potentially. So I'm going to do maybe 85. You want to get to a proper color. And once I unhide everything, we can kind of see that I have more or less of what I need to have. And it's great at this stage. We have everything unhidden, everything else around it is very well. We can kind of emphasize on our clashes instead of everything else. So now what we need to do is we need to translate this into our Autodesk viewer. So once we're complete with this, if I go and I take this set file and I kind of preload it, it's not going to give me the desired effect. However, I can output this into an NWD file. So we want to publish this current project as an NWD file, and this is usually for viewing only. We're going to kind of lock the file into what we want. We're not going to emphasize on these clashes. I mean, it's complementary to this. Usually I would provide the clash detection report, but also I would provide this as well. So now if I publish this into an NWD file, it's going to maintain all the properties and everything that's there in the same way. So all this color configuration, everything's going to be maintained. So once again, I'm just going to call this test BIM 2K final. So once again, I'm saving this file and you're going to see it's saved. It's great. Now it can be open. We have that document. We don't have necessarily the cached file. Everything is embedded within this file. So now we're going to go back to our viewer and we're going to load this file here. And you're going to see you're going to have to play around with those transparency settings at one point. Different transparency settings that provide different looks. So sometimes you have to find the just middle to get that proper visualization. If you add too much transparency, it's going to be too hollow. If you don't add enough, it's going to be too visible. So you're not going to be able to emphasize necessarily on the clashes properly. This allows us to have that greater visibility, better engagement with the stakeholders, and we want to be able to provide them with certain tools that are much more practical. So once again, we're just aiding to this process a lot more. So once again, it's being processed. It should be there in a minute. It shouldn't be too long. But once again, we can kind of visualize this a lot better. And if this is not enough, if we need to emphasize on some of these components a little bit more than 85%, we'll add it. And if I remember well, around 85 to 95 is going to be the ideal ground for getting that result at the end. Just there's no way around it. And you know, we can create the XML reports, we can provide them. We can use additional tools like BIM track and we can relay these back into Revit, but chances are the engineers are not necessarily the people that are modeling these components within Revit. So there's that disconnect where they're not able to visualize this information. And I've seen it in the past where we provide them with these clash detection reports and they're not using them. They say they are, but you can go back through clashes and clashes and clashes and, you know, different iterations of these clash detection processes. Just they're not fixing these issues because they're not even looking at them seriously. Just they don't have the time. It's a whole technical field for them that they have to learn. Most people are spread thin throughout the projects, so they won't necessarily have the time to go jump on these tools and learn them. That being said, let's just see where we are with this. And now we can kind of see this is a pretty good effect. In my opinion, I would emphasize a little bit more, but I think it's going to be pretty sufficient. I do like this NWD file. So we can kind of see they're able to navigate this. They're going to be able to create sections. For example, I can create them in my Y plane. The sections are not going to be as attractive. Actually, they're not too bad. But we can kind of see, even if I didn't use this, I can clear it. I don't want to use my sections. It's pretty visible for me. I really like this because it does provide that extra tool. On top of having this report, they're going to be able to go into this. And the feedback that I used to receive is it's very good because now they're finally able to visualize some of these clashes. They're going to be able to select them properly, go inside them, really visualize this completely and accurately to be able to navigate some of this information. So once again, potentially I would just change that transparency to a little bit more. I feel like it's a little bit too dark for my liking. So what I had earlier was the original file that I've created, and that original file was, I believe, around 90% transparency instead of the 85 that we used within this session. So once again, you're going to be able to get to a lot more information. The end goal is to really get people engaged within that process. Without that valuable feedback from the stakeholders, this process is useless. So we want to be able to engage with people. This is why we often use IFC formats. This is why we use Navisworks as a format, because obviously we're going to be able to get Navisworks Freedom, for example, which is a free to use tool. So they're able to download this without necessarily overburdening getting approvals for additional licenses, additional softwares. And once again, it's providing us with that feedback that we require. We can kind of see once again is, once we visualize these things, it's going to be a lot easier to navigate some of these things that how we did within that Navisworks environment. Sure, the Navisworks environment is fine, but it's Navisworks. It's an additional software that people have to learn. It's additional software that they have to install. So on that end, it's not very practical. So hopefully you've enjoyed this session. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comment section. I'll try to answer any questions as best as possible. And stay tuned for more. Thank you very much.